Hello friends, I am Pritesh Patil from AISSMS IOIT. In this tutorial, we are going to see the concept of transactions in databases, the ACID properties and various states of the transaction. So let us see. So a transaction is a unit of a program execution that accesses and updates various data items. For example, transaction is to transfer rupees 50 from account A to account B. So for this purpose, we have to first read the value of A, and then we have to deduct rupees 50 from A, and then we have to update the account A. So now we have to transfer this 50 into account B as shown by this arrow. So for that purpose, we have to read the value of B, and then we have to add this 50 into account B and then write B. So in the first block, we cannot say that the transaction is completed because amount 50 is deducted from A but is not been added to B. So that's why here on this stage the transaction is not completed. Then in after the last statement, we can say that when it is writing the value of B, then the transaction is completed. So now the ACID properties. To preserve the integrity of data, the database system must ensure atomicity. Either all operations of the transaction are properly reflected, executed in the database, or none of them. So which ensures the atomicity. Now consistency. Execution of transaction in isolation preserves the consistency of the database. Isolation. However, there are multiple transactions getting executed concurrently in the database, but each transaction must be unaware of other concurrently executing transactions. Intermediate transactions results must be hidden from other concurrently executed transactions. So the ultimately the main aim of this isolation property is to ensure that each transaction is independently executing. There is no information uh, explored by any of the transaction to other transactions. So last one is the durability. After a transaction completes successfully, the changes it has made to the database persist, even if there are system failure. So now the transaction state. There are 5 states. The first one is active state. It is the initial state. The transaction stays in this state while it is executing. So it is a kind of a initialization of any transaction. Then comes the next state is partially committed. After the final statement has been executed, then the transaction will go into the partially committed state. And next state is failed. After the discovery that normal execution can no longer proceed, or any other kind of system failure, or the resources has not been allocated, or any kind of errors are there in the transaction, so this state will indicate that the transaction is failed. And then aborted. After the transaction has been rolled back and the database restored to its state prior to the start of the transaction, then this state will be the aborted state. So two options after it has been aborted: first is to restart the transaction or to kill the transaction. So this we used to realize in while we transact some amount from ATM machine. So if the amount is deducted but the ATM machine have not thrown the amount out of the machine, so at that time it will not restart the transaction. It will first roll back all the transactions, means your deducted amount will be rolled back to your account, and then it will kill the transaction. right? So finally the committed state. So after the successful completion of transaction, all the changes will be committed or made permanent to the storage sections like tables and databases. So pictorially, if you want to represent this transaction state, so it will be represented like this. First, there is an active state. So there is a possibility of this is the initialization of transaction. So initially it will be in partially committed phase. So if everything is proper and resources are allocated properly, then the transaction will be committed. So here in committed state, all the changes are made permanent. So if something went wrong in at the time of initialization phase only, the transaction will go into the failed state and will be aborted. After initialization, if the transaction is in partially committed phase state and if something goes wrong, then it will get failed and then aborted. So like this the transaction states works in database. So finally, to conclude, we have seen the representation of a transaction where we have seen the transaction for uh, transferring the amount of rupees 50 from account A to account B. Then we have discussed various acid properties, and then we have discussed the states of transactions. Thank you very much.